Welcome to this podcast is making me thirsty. The number one destination for Seinfeld fans. This is episode 73. Today's guest is an award-winning writer, producer, and TV and radio host. He published a memoir, Banging My Head Against a Wall, a comedy writer's guide to seeing stars. He's worked on Third Rock from the Sun, The Pat Sajak Show, The Merv Griffin Show, and Cheers. And of course, he was a writer and program and script consultant on Seinfeld for more than 20 episodes in 1994 and 95, including writing one of the greatest episodes in television history, The Opposite. Please welcome Andy Cowan. Andy, thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for pronouncing my last name correctly.
Just practicing for a little while before you came on.
We did our homework, Andy. And listen, the book is fantastic, so make sure you guys go out there and buy it. And the best line of the book that kind of captured me was what you said about Seinfeld. You said, the chemistry among the principals and natural rhythms in those early years of the show were electrifying to me. So
Absolutely.
Take us back, 1992. That's when it all began, where you started pitching Larry. Tell us how that whole process came about.
Yeah, I had a manager at the time, Tracy Columbus, who knew Larry, and she enabled me to begin a faxing regimen with him. Dates me right there, fax. And I would fax ideas left and right to him. And, he was a tough cookie, but he was receptive to various pitches to some degree, but never to the extent where he'd say, go off and write it just yet. But one early one I've talked about before, I talk about in the book that he liked was The Lost Bra, where
Yes.
George discovers a huge lost bra in the dryer in the laundromat, and he looks at it as his glass slipper. I mean, if he meets the woman, this bra fits, all bets are off. So, and of course, Kramer disabuses him of this. Oh, of course, it's a grandmother's bra. Look at the lace on there. So it was an interesting story of imagining who it was, and then fearing it was an older woman. But anyway, he ultimately said, well, we're going to do a bra story this season, which I don't believe was the Manzier. I think it was something else. But he says, you got
Bra
any
salesman.
else?
It was when George was a bra salesman, probably.
It maybe that was, now, was that the same as the Manzier, or was that a separate one?
That was a separate one.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
you guys know better than any of us. So as a last ditch effort, I tossed him an idea I always thought about myself, that I should have done the complete opposite of whatever I've done up till now, and I would have been better off. And I pitched him this thing, and right away he took a shine to it, and he had me go off and write other stories before approving them ultimately enough to go off and write a first draft, which I did, and it was finished the day of the Northridge earthquake, the morning of. And if I had dotted a few more I's a little later in the day, a bookshelf would have toppled all over me. All hell broke loose. The Seinfeld set was put into mothballs for a while. And anyway, by the time he finally got it, he really liked the writing. And basically it was, I'll take it from here. And then when he kind of reported somewhat sheepishly after the table read that it got a really good response, but he and Jerry were going to be taking credits, I wasn't too upset. I was still thrilled that it was going to be made, and I was sharing it with those guys of all people. And it wound up the finale of that season. And I, came in as a guest writer. And of course, it was drastically changed, as scripts are, and especially on that show, Jerry and Larry would take everybody's and rework it. But the main hook, the opposite, George is bemoaning his station in life, and then approaching that woman in the restaurant. I provided that launching pad, and he was very kind about how I executed that setup. But I still was not able to get on staff. I was drooling to get on staff because it was late in it was late in the season, or no, it wasn't late yet. But anyway, I joined up with Diane English's show, Double Rush. And I finally broke that contract when they agreed that I could be on staff of Seinfeld, which was such a thrill. And I tell that story in the book, how Larry kind of said, well, what if there isn't money? What if Castle Rock doesn't have enough money? And this was after the dominoes had already fallen, and I'd already broken the contract with Diane, which I was nervous about, because you heard rumors that she was, tough about that, but she couldn't have been more gracious. And then I said, Larry, I already told her the dominoes have fallen. And then you hear that unmistakable Larry David laugh. I can't do it now, but he was goofing on me a little bit. But what a thrill to wind up on that show. However short-lived, and I talk about those frustrations in the book. I wrote my ass off in terms of pitches and stories, and readers can see in the book a whole slew of pitches that never wound up on the air. It's almost like a reboot of Seinfeld. You can see these new episodes, as it were.
So the earthquake was 94, and you were pitching since 92. I mean, you hear about it. Jerry talks about it, such a close-knit group. Like, I know you were faxing, but did you literally just fax that opposite idea and he came back and said, let's work on this?
No. And it's funny. I didn't recall whether it was 92 or 93. Maybe it was 92, late 92. But I would have phone conversations with Larry. And that last go around with the bra, when he kept saying he liked it, but then even said he liked it when I got over there. But he said, you got anything else? That was on the phone. And I literally pitched him this last ditch idea on the phone. And I could tell right away. He took to it. And he did not suffer fools. He would let you know when he didn't like something. And right away, I got the sense, well, maybe there's something here. And but it took a lot of noodling to get to the point where he greenlit the thing. And then, the fact that it was a finale, he had to change a lot of things, tie up loose ends, give a reason for George to leave his apartment, which wound up via the opposite into the job with the Yankees. So, I wasn't privy to all that. My opposite, and readers can read the extent of the opposite in the book, what my turns were. And they can also go on YouTube and see a little sampling of me with Jason Alexander in a talk show pilot I hosted in 2010, where Castle Rock gave me permission to reenact scenes from my first draft of the opposite. I playing Jerry, and George and Jason playing George, a writer's dream to perform the first draft.
Very cool. Yeah, we checked it out beforehand, obviously. Very cool. And you mentioned, so after season 5, the opposite was the season finale. So now you're brought on in season 6. And you mentioned obviously the book has a lot of these ideas that maybe didn't make it on the show, but can you kind of talk about what I know from what we've gathered, Seinfeld doesn't have your typical writer's room, right? So, and Larry and Jerry pretty much touch every script at some point. But can you kind of take us through what it is like? I mean, when you have these ideas, are you bringing them just straight to Larry? Are you in a room with all the other writers? Are you guys one pitches an Elaine idea? I mean, are they taking someone's George idea and someone else's Elaine idea and putting them? I mean, kind of just on a general sense, maybe, or if you have specific examples of sort of how the writing went throughout season 6 when you were there.
Yeah, well, it certainly was a unique situation in more ways than one, because I started late, which is one of the reasons even Larry mentioned that it was ultimately, challenging for me to get stuff on the air. But they didn't even have room for me in the building where the writers were. So this was perfect for me. I had my own dressing room office, my own bathroom, guest stars outside my dressing room. Their name plates would change every week. Florence Henderson for all these other sitcoms on the lot. And there I am just writing away, no distractions, because I hate table writing. I always have hated writing by committee. And when I was there, it wasn't written over on at the table. It was independently pitched to Larry and Jerry, sometimes Jerry, on the fly. What about this? What about this? Oftentimes Larry. And, when there were enough stories that he approved of, he'd send you off to write it. And and there was one time that I and another writer there, Sam Cass, were assigned to work on an independent script that came in that wound up being The Ass Man. I forget whether that was the title of the episode or not, but
Fusilli Jerry.
Fusilli Jerry, yeah.
Yes, that was actually one of my meager contributions while there. I remember Larry, I think it was Larry, yeah, asking what could conceivably wind up a person's rectum. And I said, what about uncooked pasta? It wasn't a direct, but it was ultimately into that, suggestion. And
corkscrew.
Yeah. And it wound up a 1 in a million moment, the Fusilli Jerry. But yeah, it was kind of on the fly. And, and other writers had relationships with him that I didn't. I was the first writer to land over there who did have sitcom experience and who didn't know Larry in a prior life, I believe. So that was kind of challenging too. But I don't know if I answered any part of your question there.
Well, you did. You're giving us an idea. It sounds like it's really just you're just going at Larry with your best ideas, and if he picks it, then you go and write the script. Basically, it sounds like almost right, and then they kind of tinker with it when they need to.
Yeah, if he went with enough of the stories to have you write a first draft, which I wound up doing various versions of stories, including some that he liked, and then I'd repurpose them in another script with a few other new stories. But it was frustrating. Ultimately, they didn't get on the air. And he even said to me, well, I'm sure you look at what's on the air and think my stuff's just as good. And I nodded. And
yeah, but you're on, you're there, you're on the team. I mean, you know what I'm saying? And it's the greatest show in the history of television, in most people's opinions. And you're there at the prime. So I mean, not getting on there, it's like, I don't know, you're batting ninth on an all-star team. It's not so bad, like.
It was a thrill, but it took, I licked my wounds afterwards, but it's taken me, it took me a number of years, especially as I got involved in so many other creative projects after that, including this current one that I want to mention before we leave, that it's so fulfilling and such a reminder of what I am capable of and what I've learned over so many years. And, just reflecting with a fresh mindset on the stuff I churned out back then. I'm proud of it all. The fact it didn't land is just, it's not dependent on the quality or the effort involved. In fact, as I point out in the book, speaking of the opposite, one time Larry said, "Stop working so hard." Speaking of the
Sometimes
opposite,
that's what it takes, right? Just let it come easy.
So speaking of the opposite, Andy, and I want to hop back to season 6 in a second, but for our money, I almost look at the opposite as the finale. I mean, for me, that was the peak of the show, and the show kind of shifted after that, right? Tom Sharonis left, Larry Charles left. I mean, you put together a masterpiece, quite frankly, at least thematically, the whole sense of it. I know they kind of rewrote a lot. But,
yeah, they put together a great thing. But I love the hook, I love the setup, and I love my first draft, and I got a lot of work based on that first draft.
Right, the first draft was great. It culminated a whole 5 seasons, and it couldn't, you just wrapped it up perfectly. So I'd be super proud of that. I mean, what's your take? Clearly you're a fan, and I opened up with that line you wrote in the book about the early years of the show being electrifying.
Yeah.
So we see the show as kind of years, 1 or 2 through 5 as just like the Mount Rushmore of shows. And then from there, still a great show, but a different show, a little quirky.
Absolutely.
A little cartoonish.
Yes.
Did you feel that as too when you moved from season 5 to season 6? And then obviously you watch it later throughout?
I felt little hints at it. And I do recall missing somewhat the energy and the focus. It's so interesting watching those early shows. I mean, you fall in love with hanging out with these characters. They seem real. They seem like you're cool, funny, somewhat sarcastic, but still human friends that you want to spend time with. And it's so funny. Early Jerry would have dissed a character who showed up drugging his girlfriend so that he could play with her toys.
Yeah.
But that's who later Jerry became. I mean, it became such a weird, manic, Rube Goldberg contraption of A leads to B, leads to C, leads to D events, when the early episodes breathed. There were quiet moments. That's when the show was known as the show about nothing, which it really never was. But, you know, when they'd say Snapple, no. I mean, little minor moments.
Yeah.
And
too fruity. Yeah.
and George was so, you know, later on, but in the beginning, he was such a mild mannered. He even admitted on my talk show pilot that he was doing Woody Allen early on, which is a whole other story these days.
Yeah.
But when he was concerned about causing the busboy to lose his job, oh, do you think that was because of me? And he's so meek and mild, and he goes to the guy's house, and later George would never have acted that way. And also Elaine was such a effervescent, youthful, charming, I mean, as delightful as Julia Louis-Dreyfus and her performances always were till the bitter end. She became a brittle, almost in certain places, non-caring, sarcastic, you know, to the degree where the finale really thumbed its nose at all the people who loved these characters and missed, you know, or they were going to miss them. And I don't think they got a proper send off because the characters were sitting kind of as supporting players, watching these bit players from throughout the year show up and, you know, lambast them. And they hardly even had a comment about it. It didn't seem grounded in the reality and the humane, neurotic angst that the early episodes were, that endeared me.
Andy, you must be listening to this podcast because
your sentiments are, you couldn't have said it better. We couldn't have said it better.
You hit on two, and I'm just curious, like where to put your finger on this, right? The George stuff, Elaine, 100%. They shifted more than anyone. What was the, I don't want to say decline, but the change? Was it Larry David leaving, Tom Sharonis? Was it the actors just getting sick of playing the same type of person? Could you put your finger on that, being a part of the show?
Not so, just sort of instinctively, not so much as being a part of the show. You know, the shows always evolve, obviously. Certainly when Jerry took over, the show took on a more surreal tone. You know, there were some cool episodes. I think the Merv Griffin show, speaking of my first show, his gig, was an episode when Jerry was running it. I believe, I could be wrong about that, but so I mean, there were interesting ones. It's funny. It's in conjunction with the odd guitar riffs. The odder the guitar riffs became as the seasons progressed, the weirder the show became. It became let's. I mean, Larry always was staunchly behind. We can't do anything that smacks of whatever anybody else has done. But I think they pushed that so in the latter years to the degree where they may have lost connection with what grounded it early on. So it did become this cartoonish, sometimes they became more childlike in a weird way.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I agree. Yeah, I mean, Jerry talks about, I mean, Jason Alexander talks about it in a Charlie Rose interview where he says, you know, Jerry loved Abbott and Costello, and after Larry left, Jerry kind of went in that direction, and also mentioned that the writing staff was a lot younger in the later seasons, and they were writing kind of from afar about George, where Larry was, you know, and then the older staff that was there earlier was writing, you know, as George more, and they had that bitterness or that different perspective, I guess.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Yeah.
Would you say, I mean, it sounds like it, but I'll let you tell us, was George your favorite character to kind of come up with stories for?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I related with him the most. I remember, I think Alec Berg had even mentioned that he had difficulty writing for George, or it wasn't the easiest character for him. And to me, you know, just the little man trying to make it, spoke so much to me. And even Larry said, of all people, "You are George." He said that to me, and George was supposed to be Larry. So
Speaking of Larry, sorry to interrupt. How
yeah,
what was it? What was did he? I'm assuming he didn't have like meetings with the writing staff, but did he have these sort of general, like you just mentioned some of them? Was there like a general sense of like, here's what we don't want, like don't even try and bring this to me, and here's what we do want? Or is he more just like, you guys know these characters, come up with stories, if they're funny we'll use them? Or did he sort of have rules almost that you guys had to like have in the back of your mind, or were they just more unspoken because you knew the show so well?
I think it was more of the latter. But I mean, you knew going in that story. It was all about story. The jokes weren't that important to him. They can always be handled later. It was the story, and he had to buy the story, and it had to be unlike any other story. I had a pitch that got close actually to getting on the air, and then some writer that will go unmentioned mentioned that another sitcom on the lot, I think it was a Drew Carey show, was doing a show about names. That was it. That was the beginning and end of the similarity. This was my episode was about George meeting a girl named Jerry, Jerri, and he couldn't even utter the name without all kinds of problems. So he discovers a way around it when he realizes through the mention of Gigi, the musical from the 50s, that he could say Jerry, and it would sound like a speech impediment. But if he made every word that began with a G or a J, je, he could get by that speech. So honey, pass the jello. Everything's je. Anyway, that was part of the story, and that got derailed because
his arm, yeah.
It's similar to
his arm lie. He had to lie that he could always do this. Then he kept doing that when he bumped his elbow with Lloyd Braun. But anyway.
Oh yeah, that was later,
yeah.
And it was also kind of thematically somewhat similar later on when
he dated a woman that looked like Jerry.
Yes.
Yeah,
Rick Nelson's granddaughter, I believe. Yeah. But anyway, I mentioned that because, again, if it smacked of anything that anybody else was doing, forget it. Which I always kept in my mind when I was coming up with stuff.
So just back to kind of Larry and Jerry, you mentioned in the book how impressed you were by Jerry and his kind of calmness, if you will.
Yeah.
About, he's on the number one hit show, but he kind of remains steady. And we always talk about it, him as a character. We mentioned Elaine and George kind of falling off. Jerry, for the most part, stayed in character and remained steady throughout. And Larry was kind of that East Coast neurotic, like yourself, a Philly guy. But clearly those two worked great together, right? I mean, but your dealings, I know you knew Jerry a little bit from the Merv Griffin stuff, but did you have as much interaction with Jerry as you did with Larry, or any stories you could touch on with Jerry about pitching ideas?
I didn't have I didn't have as many interactions with him, but I do remember some encounters. I first came upon him when I was doing stand-up in 1980, and he was this unknown comic who came on the scene, and he blew me away. And then years later, the Merv Griffin Show, and then, of course, years later, Seinfeld. But I do remember making him laugh once when Bruce Kirschbaum, a friend of mine and a funny writer on the show, mentioned something about you up the odds of getting something approved if the storyline involves either food or clothing. And then I pitched something. What about a story about edible underwear? And then Jerry laughed out loud. I remember. What a badge of honor to get Jerry Seinfeld to laugh.
Right.
Yeah.
Larry does one with that in Curb with edible underwear later on.
That's
Curb.
right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's interesting.
That is interesting. Of course, my other badge of honor was sharing 30 seconds of screen time with Julia Louis-Dreyfus as the voice of the DJ in the mom and pop store.
Yes, the mom and pop
Yes.
store, yeah, yeah.
Um,
I was thinking when you were talking. I mean, I don't want to. I know you had your time there. It sounds like there's some things about it you didn't love, but yeah, that's the nature of it. But I don't want you to say
I
things you don't
loved
want to
being
say.
there.
Okay,
I loved being there.
perfect.
And I was a kid in the candy shop who
Got
couldn't
it.
quite taste the candy.
So then I'm curious, what writers, were you kind of like, wow, when you were with them, when you saw how they worked and their episodes got on or their ideas came out, like just being like how, like, I'm sure you learned, and like you mentioned earlier, and we'll get to what you're doing now and things, but like you had to have learned so much as being on that show around these talented people. So I'm curious, like, who were some of your favorite, writers that were kind of on the show and what they came, even when you weren't there or when you were there, I guess, really.
I mean, early on, whenever I would see Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, this is going to be a winner, or just Larry David. And to this day, I mean, I've been watching them lately just to catch up in advance of your show. And when you see it's just written by Larry, I mean, you can hear his voice, and it's so funny, so great. So, I mean, I admired them obviously the most. Peter Melman had some great scripts early on. Let me think who else was on the staff.
Larry Charles, of course.
Oh, Larry Charles always had that dark underbelly.
Yes.
Yeah, always interesting to watch his stuff.
In the book, Andy, you mentioned that obviously it was season 6. Actually, let's go back to the opposite. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So you like, how long was that process? I know you submitted, they did the table read, but you also mentioned that he asked you to do the voice of Steinbrenner.
Oh yeah. I actually have that on YouTube.
Can you do a little Steinbrenner for us? We have a big Yankee fan base here.
You know what? While we're talking, let's see if this is going to work. I'm gonna call it up and see, because this is you're about to hear the actual audition I did for that role, because Larry suggested I do it. So you're good with voices, whatever. And then of course, ultimately Jerry said, you do the voice to Larry, and of course he made it his own. It was fantastic. But I've done a lot of mimicry over the years. And so I really studied his voice, but let me see.
Well, you were a great DJ with a lane there, for sure.
That was exciting. All right, here we go. This is it. All right.
Money's not going to her. It's for her family until the fish start biting again.
Here we go.
But the money's not going to her. It's for her family until the fish start biting again. I made my money in shipbuilding, so I know a little bit about the fishing business, my friend. And let me tell you something. When those little babies aren't biting, there's nothing you can do about it. And all the money in the world doesn't make a difference. And it's too bad about the mother, too. I can understand her disposition being affected by the loss of family income. Naturally, she would take it out on the customers. God knows the New York press, they give me the business sometimes.
All right, that's it.
Wow,
That was really good Steinbrenner.
Oh, like that, the Cleveland accent.
You definitely had it down. Was that a
Oh my
script, or
God,
you
that
just
would have been
ad-libbing
great.
that stuff?
What a gig that would have been. Oh,
Yeah, I mean that sounded like Steinbrenner, man. I
Yeah.
know that's first Steinbrenner talking.
the story of my life. Missed it by this much. Hence my book, Banging My Head Against the Wall, a comedy writer's guide to seeing stars.
But so overall, it sounds like the experience with Larry, he seemed like a good guy to you. I know the writing credits, the whole thing.
Yeah. He had a good heart underneath. And even years later, somebody attended a Writers Guild conference where he spoke, and my friend told me that Larry mentioned me because somebody raised their hand and said the opposite was their favorite episode. How did that come about? And he mentioned me. Andy Cowan had a great idea, whatever. So, I think he is a mensch underneath the curmudgeonly, exterior.
And it sounds like you had a relationship, I guess, with some of the higher ups, like Glenn Padnick at Castle Rock.
Right.
Did that help, or do you think sometimes hurt any opportunities within the show?
No, I don't think it hurt. It was a needed buffer for me because I was frustrated, and I sent him the scripts. I said, you tell me, well, am I nuts? And he said, I have no idea why this is literally what he said. I have no idea why these haven't landed on the air. It's just, it is what it is. And, it was his show. And so I took what I could from the situation, just being around it and having the experience of writing as much as I did, irrespective of whether it got on the air or not. I just was more in tune with my sensibilities and my abilities than ever. And, there were writers there, my buddy Bruce Kirschbaum, who said I was, one of the best at story. So I counted that as an appreciated comment. So obviously it was a thrill to be there, and I'm thrilled I got to serve time there. However,
I think you got an Emmy snub that year.
Yeah, Larry even thought the opposite was going to get a nod.
Yeah,
he even told me that.
So obviously, like you just said, you learned an just invaluable experience of being there, and just the discipline of writing that much on a show like that. It's lent to, things you've gone on to. You mentioned, so where are you at now? You mentioned there's a project right now that you wanted to bring to our attention.
2 quick postscripts to Seinfeld that I'm very proud of. One, Jason Alexander wound up buying a pilot of mine that he even said was he said it was great, and in comparison to the pilot of Seinfeld, because it was a different animal. That it was a Langwood pilot, which was such a thrill to be attached to Jason. And we wound up selling it to Fox, but they didn't wind up going with it. And then after that, I took that script and polished it a little bit, reworked it a little bit, just to update it. And Andy Ackerman loved it.
Yes.
And tried to convince his bosses at Paramount to go with it, and they didn't get it. So I still felt vindicated in a way by those experiences, even though they didn't go the distance. But the last year or more, I've been working in a more creative capacity than ever on a comedy therapy podcast that was due to drop in the fall. I signed with a guy who used to oversee Westwood One, Mike McVeigh, Benstown Media Podcast Network. And this is such a creative, this is the project that I was meant to do, because it's writing, it's performing, it's editing, it's reshaping, it's music, it's called the neurotic vaccine. I am seeking immunity from neurosis. And my co-host is a therapist. We first started doing this show as speaking of the opposite, up and down guys. I was the down guy. I saw the glass half empty. He was the guy who saw it half full. We did shows on the web. I did it on public radio. We did a Westwood One pilot. They loved that. But I turned it into this show. And we have great guests, Jay Leno, Shark Tank's Mr. Wonderful, Kevin O'Leary, Kathy Geiswhite, creator of Kathy Comment, Jerry Mathers and Tony Dow from Leave It to Beaver. I talk in therapy about, I could never live up to, the ideals of the Cleaver household. And then we have them on. It is a fantastic show, and I can't wait for this thing to drop and have people connect with it, because it is very Seinfeldian in its own way.
Of course, with neurosis, it sounds like it's right up Seinfeld fans' alley.
Yeah,
that's awesome, man. Speaking of, so you had, I mentioned in the opening, you wrote for Cheers, which is obviously an iconic show, one of the greatest shows of all time, in our opinion, as well. And there was some Seinfeld crossover there in your Cheers episode with Brenda Strong was in your episode, who later played Sue Ellen Mischke. And you do also a Wheel of Fortune bit in one of your Cheers episodes. And then you went on to work with Pat Sajak, which is always, we're big Wheel of Fortune fans over here, actually. I'm just curious, we've talked to other people who've been on Cheers. I don't know if we've talked to any writers from Cheers, though. I mean, how did that process work? I'm sure it's much different than Seinfeld as far as getting a script, greenlit on Cheers. Can you kind of talk to that a bit?
That was really ironic, because I actually count Cheers as the most satisfying experience in terms of connecting with the showrunners, the Charles brothers, class acts. The late David Angel was our guardian angel. He got us the gig. I was working at the Merv Griffin show at the time. I had a writing partner at the time, Dave Williger, who was working there, and we landed our spec script, because everybody said, don't write a spec script for a show that for the same show, because they're going to be too nitpicky about it. But we said, the hell with it. You know, we love Cheers. We're going to do a spec script, put it on the pile, had a guy represent us as our pseudo agent, sat on the pile for 6 months. And then we hear, oh, by the way, they really liked your script. What? I mean, this was almost like an afterthought. And it led to three big Shelley Long era scripts and a fourth story. And I had Ted Danson as a guest on the Merv Griffin show as a talent coordinator. I also performed on the show. The same week, our first Cheers premiered. And he hands me that script with everybody's signatures on it. And what a headline moment. And then he says, yeah, and then you open it and you see, okay, well, it's not all your stuff, but he says, happens to everybody. But there was enough of our stuff in there, you know, for us to continue to get gigs there. And what a thrill to be at that iconic set and see those guys and the majesty of those 4 cameras moving. And it was a thrill. So I have really fond memories to this day of Cheers, even though I was ultimately just a freelance writer for the show.
Very cool. Yeah,
I mean, listen,
the Ted Danson Seinfeld connection as always too, which we always love.
And Larry David and Curb,
If it wasn't for Cheers, you know, Seinfeld may not have become what it became. Let's be honest, right?
That's right.
So it's funny reading through your book. There were a couple of story ideas I thought were pretty funny. I just want to know if you could highlight any others you thought should have made it. For instance, when Elaine was going for a job, they came in with coffee, you know, 1 cream, 1 sugar, 1 black. And Elaine raises her hands or responds, "I'm black."
Yeah.
So they thought she got the job because she was black, and she didn't. So I don't. That was season 6, right?
I pitched that when I was there during season 6. Yeah.
So when you pitch those, I think like Tony asked earlier, is it just for an Elaine, or are you putting that within the whole show? How does that work?
Yeah, I just pitched that as one of the 4 stories. Although Larry at one time said you can pitch fewer stories, but it pretty much became 4 stories servicing all the characters. And that was my Elaine story. I always thought of that as an Elaine story. Just like the George story, I always thought, which dovetailed into a Jerry story about George going to the movies and purposely taking a date to a movie featuring an actor less good looking than he is, because you're trapped in a theater for 2 hours looking at Tom Cruise. The first thing you look at is George. You can't help but be let down. So
that's a good George story.
So that's why he deduces that Jerry's date didn't go well. You took it a seat. Why didn't you take it? So it's a funny. I love that story. I love the one where, speaking of George, where he tells his new girlfriend he's out of change at a wishing well. And she calls him cheap when he walks, and you hear jingling coming from his pocket. So he goes out of his way to convince her he's anything but cheap. And that jingling was the car keys to the car he bought her, which is really Jerry's new car, which George knows she's not going to accept this early in the relationship. She'd be too guilt-ridden. So I thought that was an interesting turn of events. But yeah, it's like Sophie's Choice with me. There are tons of stories I like.
I know, and like Larry said, I bet you think your ideas are better than what we're seeing out there, but
or as good.
Yeah,
and I did.
Well, I mean, listen, from Fusilli, Jared, and all these kind of concepts you mentioned, I mean, they're fantastic, and you obviously led the strategy behind the opposite with the whole concept. So I mean, bravo, and just.
Oh, thank you.
This has been a pleasure, Andy, and really looking forward to seeing the new podcast drop. It sounds amazing.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I will happily add you to my subscriber list and keep you guys posted. And again, if you want to read the book, it's on Amazon. Banging My Head Against the Wall: A Comedy Writer's Guide to Seeing Stars, by yours truly, forward by Jay Leno.
Yeah, it's a great book.
We were just going to
Thank you.
plug it, but you just did it. Wonderful.
Oh, okay. I'd rather you plugged it.
No, it's a great book. I mean, the insights. I mean, it's great to hear those stories and just from that perspective. And I don't know, I love the twists and turns and nuances of a career and things like that, and how you go from one thing to the next. I don't know. Those are really interesting stories.
And a great
Thanks,
story about a fake name, Sandy Troy, who.
So
you're gonna have to read the book on that one, folks.
Yeah. Yes, the ballsiest thing I've ever done.
Awesome. Well, Andy, this has been a pleasure. Thanks for all you've done in your career, and we're looking forward to see what happens next with you.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thank you,
Real
Andy.
pleasure. Take care.
Thank you, man.